At the beginning of February, Black History Month, we began a month-long series on African Americans' accomplishments, often unsung in education, health and medicine, and arts and culture. This American history is bigger than just a month. So this week, we visited where this history lives. We take you inside the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture to meet the man who has made telling these stories his life's work.
This concourse level, you'd be surprised at the number of programs that we actually do here.
Artist, musician, actor, and lifelong storyteller, Dr. Rex Ellis's story begins when he was an actor, starting off in colonial Williamsburg.
Williamsburg is so urban, we needed kind of a place that allowed us to talk about rural life on this plantation at Williamsburg.
There he portrayed an 18th century slave. Little did he know the approach he took to this role would eventually guide him on a career path devoted to raising the African American experience to the forefront of the American conscience.
Those who were doing the program wanted us to not break character. They wanted us to stay in character and then do the roles. I insisted after 2 weeks that that wasn't going to be the case because too many people were confused. It was a very, very difficult thing to do.
Dr. Ellis wanted to make sure visitors to the space understood colonial America was made up of more than just cherry trees and powdered wigs, but he met some resistance.
On the one side were African Americans who didn't want to talk about it at all because it was slavery, and on the other side were white Americans who didn't want to talk about it because it was an embarrassing time in American history.
But soon, local and national media alike started noticing how he was openly teaching a history of slavery.
After this program began to legitimize the research and the investigation of black history during the colonial period, there was this acceptance that became a part of colonial Williamsburg that allowed the subject of slavery to be discussed and talked about even in how interpreters were being trained.
Years later, he went from Williamsburg to Washington, where he now helps oversee the largest collection point of African American history in the country. Telling your story, I am challenged because what is in this building, indeed the building itself, is so hard to describe. What do you hope that folks who visit here will leave thinking and feeling?
The short answer is that African American history matters, that it is the quintessential American story, that once they leave here, they realize how comprehensive that story is, how inspiring that story is, how difficult that story is, and how that story, in many ways, defines who we are as Americans, whether black or white. It defines who we are as Americans and should be a part of the American story.
Black History Month in February is a bit of a conundrum. Without it, some of these stories would never be told. But do we risk frustrating the assimilation that is our goal by singling out a month?
I think African American history is 365 days a year. I think that we realize that now. But if you think about when African American history or Negro History Week evolved, it was in 1926, when segregation still ruled the land, when African Americans were being lynched, when their history was not even a postscript. In most advertisements and most articles, historians were not writing about African American history. We've got people who have done extraordinary things, but no one knows and no one cares. But if you ask me, the goal is to acknowledge that there is no month that African American history is not significant, not important, and not a part of our global history as a nation.
It is American history.
Absolutely right.
So what do you say to white folks who might think that this place is only for African Americans?
I say to them, come visit. This is a museum that hopefully helps people understand that they are connected in ways they may not realize, in ways they may not acknowledge. But hopefully after they come through the museum, they will see things that remind them that our history is their history as well.
Yet still, African American history and American history seem to be on separate tracks.
You can't talk about African American history without talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly, because so much of it is ugly. Racism is still with us. It hasn't left. Intolerance is still with us. It hasn't left. I mean, just read the newspaper. Just look at where we are now. So it is still an issue because we would rather look at the good than to acknowledge the bad and the ugly. We would much rather see America through the lens of the founding fathers rather than realize that Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner himself. We would rather talk about what we have done that has uplifted the world, what we have done that makes this a great nation. And what we don't realize is that uncovering all of our history and realizing how we have overcome much of that history, rather than seeing history as a mystery, is what I think is important about what we must do as we move forward. But it's still a contended history.
What is the moment in this labor of love that you say, that's why I do this?
We have an exhibition on the second level of the History Gallery. It is an exhibition that was very, very difficult, that we didn't even have any idea we were going to be discussing and talking about, because we didn't know that we'd have the artifact. We obtained Emmett Till's casket. We put together an exhibition that talks about his life. His mother had a casket made that had half of it under glass, so that the world could see what they had done to her son, this is Mamie Till Mobley. And we display that. One day, we're going in the exhibition, and one of my curators witnessed as this woman was sitting and watching, looking at the casket and reading about and watching all of the audio and the video on him, she began to cry. Another man comes into the museum, and he comes into the space where this woman is, and he sees her crying. He happened to be your complexion. And when he saw her crying, he went over to her and he said, "Can we cry together?"
Wow.
She started for a moment, grabbed his hand, and they stood in front of Emmett Till's casket and they cried together. That is the moment that convinces me that what we do here is so important that everyone needs to come and see it and experience it, because they'll never forget that moment. And I doubt that that man was someone who was gregarious enough to just say that. It was the power of the moment that gave him the permission he needed to ask, and gave her the compassion she needed to grab his hand and realize that this is about us all.
If people leave here changed, it worked.
To me, to be able to contribute to a dream that existed before I was born, to help it come to fruition and realize that it will be a dream realized long after I have gone, that's quite a gift. Quite a gift.